On September 11th, 1297, William Wallace's 6,000 Scottish farmers and outlaws faced 12,000 of England's finest soldiers at a narrow wooden bridge. By sunset, thousands of English lay dead or were drowning in the River Forth, and their commander was being skinned so his flesh could be worn as a belt. This never should have happened. On paper, the English army was unbeatable. It had around 2,000 heavy cavalry and 10,000 infantry, making it one of the most feared killing machines in Europe. The Scots should never have stood a chance against them. Yet on 60 feet of rotting wooden bridge, Scotland's independence was on the line. Common men with spears broke the military backbone of an empire. And what happened on that day shaped the way Europe fought wars for the next 700 years. By the end of this video, you will understand how William Wallace turned geography and simple arithmetic into a weapon, and why some of the best trained knights in Europe drowned in their own armor. So, how did barefoot farmers destroy English cavalry? To answer that, we have to see who William Wallace was before he became a legend, and what England did to Scotland that made ordinary men ready to die on that hill. Before Stirling Bridge, Scotland was already broken on parchment. Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots, had crushed Wales and burned Berwick, where his troops killed 7,500 civilians in a single day. Even priests were cut down screaming. His message was simple: submit or perish. That message arrived in Scotland with one hated man. Hugh de Cressingham, Edward's treasurer, taxed churches to pay for English wars and lined his own pockets while children starved. Chroniclers called him smooth-tongued and cruel, a man who seemed to enjoy humiliation more than money. The so-called Ragman Roll, a giant oath list, forced Scottish nobles to kneel and name Edward their overlord. Those who refused lost everything. King John Balliol rotted in the Tower of London, and Scotland looked finished as a kingdom. Out of that humiliation came two unlikely leaders. William Wallace, a minor outlaw knight who had watched English soldiers kill his father and later his wife, turned grief into fury. Andrew Moray, the Northern Phoenix, saw his lands given to foreign nobles. Neither man was bred to command armies, but both were done with kneeling. Wallace's resistance began as personal revenge. In May 1297, he killed William Heselrigg, the official who had ordered his wife's death. A vendetta became a revolt. Farmers picked sides. Blacksmiths forged spearheads. Outlaws slipped from the woods to join the fight. In the north, Moray did the same. Their ambushes made English patrols vanish from the roads, and garrison commanders sent nervous letters south. By September, their banners flew over almost everything north of the River Forth. But holding countryside meant nothing if they could not stand in open battle against Edward's armies. Sooner or later, they would have to meet England head-on. That moment came with John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey. A veteran of the Welsh Wars, he marched north at the head of an English army built from Scotland's own nobility, men who had bent the knee to Edward, now ordered to fight their countrymen. Behind his banners came the force Wallace would one day watch feed itself onto a bridge. The Scots answered with a new way to stand against cavalry. They formed schiltrons, tight blocks of spearmen that looked like hedgehogs of death. A wall of steel points no horse wanted to charge. Wallace and Moray chose their ground carefully. They put their men on Abbey Craig, a volcanic rock just north of the bridge. From that height, they could watch every glint of English armor. The slope below them added force to any downhill charge. The narrow approach to the bridge turned the field into a funnel. Geography became a Scottish weapon. Facing them stood the English army at Stirling, around 12,000 strong. There were 2,000 heavy cavalry and thousands of infantry drilled in formation fighting. Welsh longbowmen, fresh from conquering their own homeland, now aimed at Scotland. Inside the English camp, Surrey faced a command crisis. Cressingham, as treasurer, controlled the money. Every extra day in the field drained Edward's revenues. Feeding 12,000 men cost a fortune. Surrey wanted time to explore options. Cressingham demanded a quick attack. At a war council, a Scottish knight in English service, Sir Richard Lundy, offered another path. He told Surrey of a ford at Drip, where 60 horsemen could cross abreast. Using that crossing, the whole army could be over the river within hours and fall on Wallace's flank. Surrey listened. Cressingham exploded. He accused Surrey of cowardice and snarled that they were wasting the king's money keeping this rabble waiting. Surrey, stung by the insult, made a choice that would haunt him. They would not take the ford. At dawn, they would cross the bridge. By dawn on September 11th, the trap was ready. Up on Abbey Craig, Wallace watched the English camp stir. Below him, the ground was already doing half the work. Marsh on both sides of the northern bridgehead would suck at cavalry hooves. The narrow causeway beyond stopped them spreading out. Scottish infantry waited in the trees, hidden from men on the riverbank. This is where things really start to go insane. September 10th crawled by while everyone waited, and Surrey called a war council. That's when Sir Richard Lundy urged using the ford. But Hugh de Cressingham, furious, accused Surrey of cowardice. He snapped that they were wasting the king's money keeping this rabble waiting and should strike now, scatter them like chaff. Surrey, stung by the insult, made a choice that would haunt him. At dawn, they'd cross the bridge. The plan sounded simple enough. 2 by 2, knights would move over 60 feet of creaking wood, then form up on the north bank before advancing. Up on Abbey Craig, Wallace watched. Below him, the ground was doing half the work. Marsh on both sides of the northern bridgehead would suck at cavalry hooves. The narrow causeway beyond stopped them spreading out. Scottish infantry waited in the trees, hidden from men on the riverbank. By dawn on September 11th, the trap was ready. At 5 a.m., English drums smashed the morning quiet. Mist rose from the river Forth and wrapped both armies in grey. Out of that fog, the bridge appeared, a wooden path to ruin, 60 feet long and about 6 feet wide, planks already groaning under their own weight. The next 60 seconds would mark Surrey for life. Now listen to the numbers. 2 horsemen every 30 seconds. At that rate, moving 2,000 cavalry would take more than 8 hours. Infantry could move faster, 4 men abreast, but they still had to squeeze through the same narrow gap. It was simple arithmetic any competent commander should have seen. Around 5:30 a.m., Wallace's scouts reported the first riders stepping onto the bridge. English knights in full battle gear, lances upright, shields bearing the 3 lions of England. The spans sagged under each destriera's weight. Planks meant for carts now carried war horses and steel-clad men. The Forth ran deep here, about 15 feet at the supports. September rains had swollen the current, pulling hard to the east. Armour doesn't float. The weight that saved a knight on land became a death sentence in the water. Hour by hour, the crossing went on. By 6 a.m., roughly 200 men were on the north bank. By 7 a.m., about 500. By 8 a.m., around 1,000. They were crammed onto a narrow strip of marshy ground that kept them from spreading out. Any sensible commander would have secured higher ground first, but Cressingham kept pushing them forward from the south bank. Then came a sound no leader wants to hear. The faint wail of Scottish pipes, growing louder. Wallace's men were stirring on Abbey Craig, but they still didn't attack. English knights relaxed. To them, it looked like the Scots were too scared to come down and face them. By 9 a.m., about 2,000 were over. By 10 a.m., close to 3,500. What Surrey saw next broke his nerve. He stayed on the south bank, watching his own army drip across the bridge into Wallace's killing ground. Cressingham's pressure and the sheer number of men already over made any retreat almost impossible. Once an army starts over a bridge like that, stopping looks like weakness. By 11 a.m., around 5,000 English soldiers were jammed onto the north bank. Heavy cavalry at the front, infantry packed behind, archers trying to find any place they could even see to shoot. Marshy soil grabbed at horses' hooves. In the crush, formations broke. Wallace watched and waited. His officers grew impatient. "Now?" they asked. "Not yet," he said. "Let more of them cross. Let them stand closer. Let their confidence turn to arrogance." The English line began to move toward the base of Abbey Craig, exactly as he'd planned. There was one last detail many chroniclers tried to smooth over. Some English soldiers felt uneasy. The bridge now groaned constantly. Horses shifted and whinnied, sensing danger their riders ignored. A few knights suggested waiting until more men were across. Cressingham himself had just stepped onto the bridge, his great weight making the planks bend. By 11:15 a.m., Hugh de Cressingham was halfway across the bridge and about 5,000 English soldiers were packed into the killing ground on the north bank. Wallace decided the time had come. The English vanguard had moved too far from the bridge to pull back quickly. The narrow strip of firm ground was too small to form a proper battle line. Under the bridge, another part of the plan waited. Scottish swimmers had spent the night in the icy September water clinging to the pilings. Their job was to weaken key supports when they saw the signal. The cold had numbed them almost senseless, but they stayed put. Everything depended on timing. The numbers favoured Wallace. Around 5,000 English troops stood crammed into space suited for maybe 1,000 cavalry, and those horses could not charge in that bog. Infantry had no room to form ranks. Archers had almost no clear lines of fire. Facing them were about 6,000 Scots on higher ground, with gravity and momentum on their side. Wallace rose from concealment on Abbey Craig and lifted his sword. The sun, cutting through the mist at last, flashed along the blade. Scottish eyes fixed on that point of light. English scouts saw movement and shouted, "They're moving!" Down in the marshy choke point, the army could not respond properly. Horses turned in tight circles. Infantry stumbled into one another. Officers shouted over each other. As the Scottish lines poured down the slopes of Abbey Craig, the English finally saw the trap. Their only way back, the bridge, could carry 2 horses running away no faster than it had carried 2 horses advancing. The same numbers they had trusted now worked against them. Wallace dropped his sword forward, and the attack began. 6,000 Scots charged downhill, running full speed down the volcanic slope. Many were barefoot to grip rock and mud. Their war cries merged into one roar. The ground trembled under their combined weight. English war horses, trained for shock charges, shied at the oncoming wall of men. What followed was more about angles than heroics. The schiltrons hit first. These tight circular blocks of spearmen, each man holding a 12-foot pike outward, formed a living fence of points. The first English knight to strike them was Sir Marmaduke Twenge. His destrier, seeing only spearheads, tried to turn aside. It was too late. Several pikes punched through horse and rider together. Twenge's death cry mixed with his mounts. Momentum took over. The cavalry behind him were packed too tightly to turn. Horse after horse crashed into the forest of spears. Animals impaled themselves. Knights toppled into the mud. Their 80-pound armor turned them into flailing beetles on their backs. Scottish fighters moved among them with daggers, driving steel into the weak spots in the plate, under the arms, at the groin, around the face. In that cramped space, only the English front line could swing their swords. Scottish spears reached through 3 ranks. For every English blade, 3 spear points answered. The bog grabbed at horses' hooves and stripped the cavalry of mobility. Within minutes, some of England's finest knights were dying in Scottish mud. Behind them, the next phase broke down. Welsh longbowmen, normally England's secret weapon, found themselves almost useless. Pushed in behind the infantry, they could not arc arrows cleanly over their own men. The few who tried hit English backs. The killing zone was too tight. Distances were too short. Their most feared weapon became dead weight. On the bridge, the physical world turned against Cressingham. Still on the span when the fighting began, he dug in his heels and pushed his horse forward. His weight made the structure sway. Behind him, more cavalry tried to force their way across to help the vanguard. The bridge, already weakened by the Scottish swimmers below, groaned and flexed. Cressingham's hunger for glory smothered caution. A crack like thunder rolled across the water. One of the main support beams, damaged by the saboteurs, gave way. Cressingham was directly over the weakness. For a moment he seemed to hang in the air, his face shifting from rage to shock. Then he dropped. The king's treasurer crashed through the splitting planks into the River Forth. The next 60 seconds burned into Surrey's memory. The bridge did not fail all at once. It sagged and twisted, but part of it still held. Knights trapped on it faced a nightmare choice: press forward into near certain death, or try to turn back into the mass of men behind them. Horses panicked, riders fell, armor scraped and clanged in a deafening jumble. In the water, Cressingham thrashed as his armor dragged him down. Scottish soldiers on the bank watched. Later stories said he called out, offering rich ransoms for his life. These were men he had taxed until their families starved. They did nothing. It took about 90 seconds for him to sink. Drowning in armor is not quick. The bridge, pushed beyond its limits, finally gave way. The central span, carrying dozens of knights, broke loose and dropped into the Forth. The splash rose like a wall. Water shot upward, mixed with the screams of men and horses. For a moment, both sides stopped fighting and stared. Chroniclers often hurried past what happened next. Men in armor did not simply vanish. They fought the water, hands clawed at buckles never meant to be opened underwater. War horses, strong swimmers when free, dragged some armored riders under. The River Forth ran red. Worse than the sight were the sounds. Choking cries, metal scraping on stones. Then that heavy silence when a helmet fills. With the bridge gone, the 5,000 English soldiers on the north bank had no escape. No more troops could reach them. Surrey could only stand on the south bank and watch his army die in pieces. Some knights fought bravely, most simply tried to survive a little longer. The Scottish line did not slacken. Spearmen held their formation and pushed forward step by step, grinding the enemy back. Behind them came common men with farm tools and workshop gear, scythes, hammers, clubs, finishing off the wounded. English nobles shouted offers of ransom. None were accepted. Wallace had forbidden it. This was revenge for Berwick. Some English soldiers made one last attempt to live. They stripped off their armour, threw away weapons, and stepped into the current. Scottish archers, not as famous as Welsh bowmen, but deadly at this range, shot them in the water. Bodies drifted downstream for days. The sound of men dying in the river carried over the clash of steel. Those still fighting heard their comrades behind them. The fourth, 15 feet deep and running strong, became a mass grave. Chroniclers later reckoned that around 2,000 men entered the river. Perhaps 100 reached the far bank. The rest became food for Scottish fish. What Surrey saw next broke him. His whole vanguard and main force, about 5,000 professional soldiers, were being cut down, and he could not help them. A few junior officers urged another crossing farther upstream. Surrey refused. He had already fed too many men into Wallace's grinder. The Earl, veteran of many campaigns, turned his horse and rode south. On the north bank, as English resistance collapsed, the Scots stripped the field. Every fallen knight meant armour, weapons, and horses for men who had started with farm tools. One body drew special attention. Hugh de Cressingham's corpse, washed up downstream, was dragged before Wallace. The same marshland that had trapped English cavalry also slowed Scottish pursuit. The ground that held the English in place would bog down any chase. Seeing Surrey's men retreating in good order, Wallace did not follow. He had total victory and saw no reason to gamble it. By late afternoon, English dead approached 5,100. More than 100 knights were among them, the rough equivalent of killing a class of modern millionaires, along with thousands of professional infantry. In roughly 2 hours, the core of England's occupation force in Scotland had been destroyed. Scottish losses were around 100 men, a ratio close to 50 to 1. In just 3 feet of Scottish water, infantry with spears had broken cavalry. Terrain and preparation had beaten armour and tradition. Future commanders would study Stirling Bridge to see how ground becomes a weapon and how pride becomes a trap. As the last English soldiers slipped beneath the red-stained river, the scale of the victory seemed unbelievable. More than 5,000 English dead against about 100 Scots. Numbers so lopsided that some chroniclers assumed exaggeration. The bodies said otherwise. They lay thick on the north bank, floated in the River Forth, and piled into a grisly bridge of flesh where the timber span had failed. Scotland had its victory, but it came with a special horror. Wallace ordered Cressingham's corpse flayed. The skin of the treasurer, symbol of English taxation gripping Scotland, was cut off in strips. Some became sword belts for Scottish leaders. A larger piece was reportedly made into a belt for Wallace himself. Medieval war was brutal, but this shocked hardened fighters. Then another sound rose from the Scottish lines, the cry no commander wants from his own men. Andrew Moray, the Northern Phoenix, had taken a spear wound while leading his schiltrons. It looked small at first. On a medieval battlefield, minor wounds often killed. Moray lingered for about 2 months before dying. Scotland lost a brilliant tactician just as freedom came into sight. South of the river, Surrey's retreat turned into a rout. English garrisons across Scotland, hearing of Stirling Bridge, abandoned their posts. Men who had strutted as conquerors now fled like thieves. If farmers could destroy armoured knights, what safety did any occupier have? The deserted English camp yielded riches beyond Scottish hopes. There were weapons for thousands, armour worth fortunes, war horses, the medieval equivalent of walking away from tanks, food stores for 12,000 men, and gold and silver from Cressingham's tax wagons. In a few hours, Wallace's rebels gained equipment that would otherwise have taken years of raiding to gather. Within days, he was proclaimed Guardian of Scotland, the effective military ruler in the absent king's name. A minor noble, wanted for murder only months earlier, now governed in the king's place. He used that power directly. Stirling Castle, the key fortress above the crossing, surrendered without a formal siege. English rule north of the River Forth dissolved. Word spread across Europe. Infantry had beaten cavalry. The idea seemed impossible, yet military thinkers scrambled to understand it. The Schiltron formation was studied, copied, and adapted. The age of cavalry dominance cracked at Stirling Bridge. It would split completely later at Courtrai-Crécy and Azincourt. The fourth, according to contemporary accounts, ran red for 3 days. Fishermen stayed away from their nets for weeks. Bodies washed ashore far downstream, even near the sea. Each armoured corpse reminded Scotland of its unlikely victory. The few English prisoners taken alive described the crossing as a waking nightmare. For them, the water itself had become an enemy. Edward I, campaigning in France, received Surrey's report first with disbelief, then with fury. The hammer of the Scots had been humbled by men he considered outlaws. His response would be terrible, but that lay in the future. In September 1297, Scotland was free, and Wallace was its liberator. Scottish song and propaganda spread the story. Minstrels praised Wallace the Giant. He was tall, but not remarkably so. Tales claimed the bridge had fallen at God's command, that English soldiers were cowards and Scots pure heroes. The truth, careful tactical planning and ruthless use of enemy mistakes, felt less satisfying than myth. Each dead knight represented a huge investment in training, armor, weapons, and horses. England lost more military capital at Stirling Bridge than in any battle since Hastings. Replacing those men and mounts would take years and drain royal finances. Moray paid the highest price. His wound festered. Medieval medicine offered prayers, not antibiotics. Wallace visited him day after day, watching his co-commander fade. When Moray died in November, Scotland likely lost its better general. Wallace had charisma and courage. Moray had the rarer gift, strategic genius. Stirling Bridge entered legend before the corpses cooled. Scots who had hidden in the hills came down. Former collaborators suddenly claimed to have backed independence all along. Wallace's army swelled with new recruits drawn by victory. Edward I did not accept humiliation quietly. Common men had broken professional soldiers. The fundamentals of warfare were changing. The monopoly of noble cavalry was breaking. Infantry, properly led and positioned, could dominate the field. Some later called it a democracy of death. During his year as Guardian, Wallace oversaw a brief rebirth of Scottish independence. He reorganized government, renewed links with France, and raided northern England. But the shadow of Edward I hung over everything. In 1298, the hammer of the Scots prepared methodical revenge. At Falkirk, he shattered Wallace's schiltrons with coordinated archer fire, showing he had learned from his defeat. In 1305, Wallace was captured through betrayal. His execution was designed to terrify. Hanged, then drawn and quartered, he was meant to be erased from memory. Instead, he became Scotland's martyr, and Stirling Bridge became his monument. The long-term impact reached beyond Scotland. A military revolution spread across Europe. Infantry tactics evolved directly from lessons at that narrow bridge. Swiss pikemen, English longbowmen, and Hussite war wagons all traced their lineage to the same idea. The age of invincible knights ended in Scottish mud. Scotland's identity hardened around Stirling Bridge. It proved that a smaller power could hurt a greater one, that farmers could break empires, that geography could trump wealth. For 700 years, whenever Scotland faced overwhelming odds, Stirling Bridge offered hope. Modern conflicts echo the same pattern. From Vietnam to Afghanistan, smaller forces have used terrain and enemy weaknesses to channel larger armies into killing grounds. Stirling Bridge wrote the early version of that playbook, showing that technology and numbers matter less than position and timing. Today, the Wallace Monument stands about 220 feet above Abbey Craig, marking the spot where he watched English forces feed themselves into death. Visitors look down on the bridge site, now open water. Inside, the memorial displays a sword said to be his, about 5 feet 4 inches of steel, too large for most men. Myth again presses against reality, but drowning knights make a specific sound. That sound echoes through history, in every disaster where pride meets planning and assumption meets reality. Stirling Bridge stands as an eternal warning. Respect your enemy. Respect the ground. Respect the numbers. Ignore them, and you feed armies into meat grinders. The day farmers defeated empire still reverberates. When underdogs face giants, Stirling Bridge offers a blueprint. Use what you have. Make geography an ally. Let enemy strengths become weaknesses. Sometimes the narrowest path leads to the greatest victory. 2 horsemen wide. That was all it took to change history. A bridge so narrow it concentrated overwhelming force into manageable packets. A commander so greedy he ignored obvious alternatives. A guardian so patient he let enemies trap themselves. September 11th, 1297, the day Scottish spears rewrote military science. From that wooden bridge came a nation's freedom, a continent's military revolution, and proof that empires can die in shallow water. Wallace gave Scotland more than victory. He gave them belief, and 700 years later, when tourists stand where knights drowned, they understand. Sometimes the impossible is just mathematics, patience, and the courage to raise a sword when the moment comes. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, like the video and hit subscribe for more battles. I'll see you soon.